Hello, this is John from caveofprogramming.com. In the last tutorial, we saw how we can set attributes into our session, our implicit session object from within our controller. And in this tutorial, we're going to look at working with more kind of complex Spring data models. But we're still, for the moment, going to stick with just passing a string to our JSP page because later on we're going to look at how to pass more complicated stuff, and it's not at all difficult, but it's just that I want to for the moment just concentrate on the mechanism of how we actually pass data to our JSP page. Let's go to web content here and open up the JSP, home.jsp here. So I'm going to go back to that in a second, but I want to show you first like one way, like another way that you can pass data to this page, and also we'll look at another way that you can display data. And we're not going to make use of either of these ways actually, but I want to demonstrate this in this tutorial before we go on to settle on what I think is a more elegant way of passing data to the JSP page, because you'll see them if you look at other people's code or other tutorials. So as you'll see from the document that we looked at in the last tutorial, there are various arguments we can have here and various things that we can return. And one possibility here is we could have no arguments here, but we could create in here a model and view object. So that's model and view, capital A on and there. Let's call this MV and set it equal to a new model and view. And this looks, well, it sounds complex, but it's really a pussycat. It's not complex at all. We can pass to the constructor of this Spring model and view object, it's of course a Spring class, the logical name of the view that we want to display, or at least that's one possibility. And it has a method called getModel, this model and view class, and that returns a map of, well, the values in the map are strings and the keys are objects. So let's say here map and string object model equals model and view dot get model. I'll add the import for map there, and we can now add attributes to this model, which can of course be any object at all. But let's say here model dot put. So this is just of course a normal Java map. And I'll use the key name. You can use any key you like. And for the value, well, last time we had, I think it was Boris, or was it Igor? I've forgotten. Well, I'll pick a different name this time. Let's set here, I need some kind of a name. Well, let's just put River, kind of hippie name. So, we're just putting a string into the model that we got from the model and view class that we created, and then finally here, instead of returning the name of the view, we can return the model and view object, and I need to of course change the return type to model and view. So now we're still going to display whatever corresponds to the logical name home, which is figured out by my review resolver that we saw previously. So we're going to display actually the same JSP file, and we're setting stuff in the model associated with the model and view object, and that's available to us in our JSP file. Now, one way we could get the contents of that is actually by default I should mention that the model here is not going to exist in the session. It's going to exist at request scope. So in other words, it's not going to persist for all the while that your user is using the website. The stuff we do here by default is only going to be available during the kind of scope of the request. So when a request comes in from a browser and this handles it and it goes to a JSP page, the data in this model will persist only for as long as that, which most of the time is what you want, because normally we'll be doing some kind of query here on a database, putting stuff in the model and then displaying it in a JSP. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. So what I want to show you is just how to display this value, which is now going to be available to us in request scope. And if you're not too familiar with servlets and JSPs, don't worry too much about the lingo here, because the important thing is, of course, just the code. But what we need to do here is I'm going to just copy this stuff that we use to display the session, a session attribute, and I'm going to change this from session to request, which is another implicit object that's available to you here if you use these expression tags. So request.getAttribute_name. And because we set something here in our model with the attribute name, it's going to be available in the request object with the attribute name as well. Sorry, with the key value name, I should say. So let's right-click the project and go to Run on Server again, and hopefully we're going to see that our new name, River, is going to appear here. Now, I left the session in deliberately because I wanted to just emphasize that the session is still what we set it to before. So because I previously run this project with the session set to Boris, where I was adding an attribute into the session in my controller, and the value was set to Boris, it's still going to be available here unless I go away and come back like I don't know, probably quarter of an hour later. I think the default session expiry time is 10 minutes, but I'm not completely sure. But the important thing for our purposes here is that the attribute we set here with the key value of name now appears here in this request object, and we can see River coming out here. Now, to close this tutorial, I want to actually show you a couple more things. Firstly, I want to show you another way of displaying this value, because we don't actually need embedded Java in here, and indeed it's not recommended at all to use embedded Java in your JSPs these days. What we can do is we can use something called expression language in our JSP, and again this is covered in some depth in my JSP and servlet tutorial, so I will refer you to that if you want more detailed information on basic servlet and JSP stuff. But I just wanted to explain what this is, at least, because although we're concentrating here on Spring, I want to just kind of give you a quick explanation at least of the stuff that we're using. So here I'm going to type, let's just copy this, and here I'm going to say request using EL. EL stands for expression language, and expression language is something that we can use in JSPs basically, and I'm going to get rid of this expression tag with its embedded Java and replace it with a $sign here, and an open curly bracket and a closed curly bracket, and in there I'm going to put name, the attribute that I want to refer to, and there's no quotes or anything here. It's just entirely unquoted. So whatever I put here, of course, again needs to be the same thing that I'm using here, which is what I'm using here. So let's just run this and check that this displays. So again, I'll go to Run on Server, and let's take a look. So there we see that using expression language we've output River. Now the downside to that, I don't want to dwell on this, but the kind of downside to that is that, let's say we had some kind of tagging, HTML tagging or special characters or something in this string value that we set here. Let's put in a opening and closing bold tags, for example. So closing bold tag. They are going to be now interpreted as HTML. So if you just use kind of raw expression language like this in your JSP, it's not so good, because you see that these have now been bolded, as has this in fact. And for that reason, I'm going to show you, probably in the next tutorial, a better technology for outputting stuff in your JSP, and we're going to look at JSTL. And again, I won't cover JSTL in any depth. Again, it's covered in my Servlet and JSP course, but I'll show you enough to just get started with it here in case you don't already know it. Now, to finish off, I want to show you just a more elegant way of doing this. So in fact, let's just copy this method, because I'll leave you with this source code in case you want to refer to it. Let's just comment that out and paste in a new version here. rather than creating our own model and view, we could just get Spring to pass it to us here, right here. And in fact, we don't even need to do that because we don't really need the model and view here. We can just accept a model like this. So there's a Spring model object, and we can get rid of all this, and we can return just home here like we did before. Let's add the import for model. And in here, let's change this back, the return type to string. And now here we can set stuff into the model. So I can say model dot add attribute. I think we've got an add attribute somewhere here. So we've got add all attributes there. And perhaps I've misremembered. Yeah, we haven't actually got a add attribute. Oh no, we do. Going blind. I thought I'd misremembered that for a minute. Let's add the attribute name again. And again, just to emphasize, this is whatever you want it to be. Just probably keep it short, and probably best if there are no spaces or anything weird in it. And let's put here some other name, like Tiffany. I'll save that and put a semicolon there. So the reason I like this is just because it's very close to what we actually had originally. We're still just returning the logical name home, and all we've done is accept an argument called model, and we can now add attributes to that model. And if we run this now, so run as and run on server, my session won't have timed out, of course, so I'll still have the session stuff available, which I'm not going to use. Still set to Boris, but you notice we've now got Tiffany coming out in our JSP, and we're retrieving the that attribute that we've set here and here, which is just coming from here. So I'm going to continue working with this, I think, in subsequent tutorials, but in the next tutorial we'll look at a nicer way to actually do the output here. So that's it for this time, and until next time, happy coding.